they're very parochial up here, like they're very proud. There's a long history of, like I said, food, agriculture. Everybody knows somebody. I think the work community is really a big part of that.
Welcome to a special series of The Producers in Launceston. I'm Dani Valent. For our second episode in our trip to northern Tasmania, we chat to Massimo Mele, a local chef and restaurateur who has made it a mission to use, nurture, highlight and champion local farmers and the produce they grow, make and coax into being. We travelled to Tasmania as guests of the Agricultured Producers Festival. The showcase dinner was at Grain of the Silos restaurant, overseen by Massimo and ably enacted by chefs Thomas Perker, Mika Che and their teams. The dinner was special. Not only was local produce the star of the multi-course show, the producers themselves were gathered around the tables, adding another layer of meaning to my enjoyment of this unique and resonant meal. When moving to a regional area known for agriculture, it's easy to have a romantic idea of the potential food journey. Massimo soon realised that he was going to have to build relationships, trust and systems to create the paddock-to-plate restaurant of his dreams.
Grain of the Silos is a restaurant's been open now 4 years, and I opened the restaurant with the idea of basically wanting to support the local food community. That's kind of how it started, and 4 years later it's grown into, the main objective is sourcing local and creating relationships with farmers and the food community essentially. And we have over 42 local producers that kind of sell to us, which is pretty cool. The journey, it was a tough start, yeah. I had this idea when I first moved down from Sydney that everyone must use local, it's Tassie. And so I thought that you can get produce all the time and consistently, and because it must be everywhere, because everyone keeps saying about come down to Tassie and check out the produce, and it wasn't that easy. I found out that some farmers didn't want anything to do with chefs. They thought chefs were hard to work with, and kind of up and down, and like one week they'd want it, next week they wouldn't want it, and they'd be very with the trends. So there wasn't a real kind of stable relationship with restaurants and farms. So they mainly dealt with produce markets. They just go to town and sell their produce once a week, and they were happy with that. So it took me probably 18 months to get anybody to start selling to me direct. And then that was hard because they didn't do invoice. They didn't do cash. And so working in a venue like this, which has obviously got a hotel behind it, everything needs to be above board. So I couldn't, so I started basically paying them and then invoicing the business myself just so I could get the produce, which was a lot of work. But I was trying to kind of just bridge the gap. So that's kind of how it started. And then after a while, we started to, expand on that. And then kind of what we did was I had like a list of questions that I'd start with, like, how often can you deliver? What do you like to grow? Could you deal with a 14-day turnaround for invoicing? Do you do electronic invoicing? So if I get 3 or 4 yeses, I'd kind of pursue that, because at that point, if I didn't get those, it was just too hard. And after a while, probably 2 years it took, and Walters, you met last night especially, he just turned around and just one day he just went, hang on, like, I get you're trying really hard. And as soon as he came on board, a few more started coming on board, and we started to get that, kind of that momentum with the support. So yeah, that probably would have taken 18 months to 2 years.
In recent years, chefs and diners have rekindled a passion for good local produce, and at the same time, some farmers have started to unchain themselves from monocultural farming at scale. It's more than a trend, something of a movement, and building trust and community at every step along the supply chain is crucial.
I think it's the right moment. I think, like I said, when I first moved back to Tassie, that would be 7 years ago, I had this real kind of romantic notion about Tasmania, and it so wasn't true. Like, I remember the first farm. I was down south, and I wanted some goat's curd, and he was like, "No, if I have to give you that much goat's curd, I'm going to have to milk more goats, and I don't want to do that." You know, and now that these guys are like, you know, they won awards and they're amazing producers, but like that was kind of the mentality back then. So I think a lot of people started like hobby farms as well, and then when they started to understand that they could probably scale a little bit and work out where that line is, like they don't want to get too big because they don't want to kind of ruin the brand or the product by being really commercial, but then they can't just be doing 20 litres of milk a week because they're not going to make any money. So I think what's happened in the last couple of years is a few people have kind of figured out a few tricks to kind of make it work, and I think it's kind of happened at the same time, but it's also happened in the last 5 years, I think, because people have just wanted to eat better, and people are going to the markets and not just getting an Instagram photo of a celery sticking out of their bag and while they've got their bagel and coffee. They're actually going to the markets and shopping, not for the week, but to get, you know, the majority of their fresh produce, you know, and then hopefully that'll last, which is essentially what I do in all the restaurants that I work with. We get a delivery only once a week. And so we've got to figure out how to make that last. And that's the tricky part. And I think in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of people even moving to Tassie and wanting to, you know, not all of them, you know, are successful, but I think there's a real kind of trend or a real movement into people wanting to either have their own food or go and source their own food that from someone that they trust and respect. With restaurants, I think, for us especially, we've seen people kind of gravitate towards us because we've got the ability to help them grow. So, you know, I remember our first baker, like, unbelievable baker, but he only bakes once a week when we first opened the restaurant. I'm like, well, this is a hotel. So if I get the bread for the restaurant, we need to get it for the hotel as well. He's like, no, I only bake once a week. I'm like, well, can you bake 3 times a week? 4 years later, he's got 2 shops and 3 vans, and, you know, like I just said, trust me, like, we'll work together. We don't jump ship. So that's the other thing about having that trust. People come to us because they know we don't just kind of dump someone when something new comes along. So I think that trust is what's also helped the business grow and that kind of community of farmers around us, because they know when we say something, we do it.
Of course, all chefs use produce, but there are various ways of engaging with it. What is behind Massimo Mele's approach to fresh ingredients?
I mean, I always had a huge respect because I come from a family of farmers in Italy, and you know, growing up in Tasmania, like, our backyard was like being in Naples. Like, there's just produce everywhere, and to the point where you couldn't even play ball games because my mother would like cringe every time a tomato plant got crushed. But I think visiting the farms has probably been my kind of, you know, like, it really showed me what's going on. Like, you know, the first farm I visited, I was picking potatoes, and I remember, like, these guys have been doing it for 50 years, you know, family and 2 or 3 third generation, and how hard they worked for $4 a kilo just blew my mind. It was actually $2 a kilo. And these are potatoes that we use in the restaurant. And I was like, I spent the day with them, and I thought, wow, I was only there really for an hour on the truck, you know, picking. And, you know, dealing with weather, climate, seeds not inoculate or not working and not growing, losing our harvest, or last year, like with the rains, we lost everything. And so I think that appreciation for where it's coming from, the effort they put in. I also started growing my own vegetables. I have a big garden at home. And I was like, wow, that's hard. Makes you think, like, in somewhere when everything's in abundance, just how hard you work, and then how hard you work to kind of preserve it so you don't waste it. And I think that appreciation for food, and I've always had an appreciation for food because I've grown up in a home where we're always at the table, and mum grows everything, and you learn to respect food, and especially the people that are putting it on the table for you. But these guys work really, really hard, and I think the appreciation comes from understanding that not everything always is going to be comes to plan. So because we have a good relationship, we can kind of go, well, you know what, I understand that we haven't got spigarello this week. Well, that's okay. We'll use the broccolini flowers, and a couple of weeks you'll be back on track, and we'll get that back on. And so there's that mutual respect, and I think that works rather than, well, that's not good enough. Why is it not here? We don't have any of that. And part of my role as I guess a mentor with the chefs, and I'm not heavily involved in the kitchen, but more the operations, is making sure that, you know, I'm CC'd on all the emails, because I want to make sure that we speak to our producers with respect. So in the past, I've had some people say, well, I need this tomorrow. It's like, that's not how we talk to them. These guys are friends, and you see them last night in the event, you know, sitting down, and we're all mates. So you don't speak to your friends like that. And that's, I think, what is the beauty of all this, is that they're not just suppliers. They're not a name on the wall, and it works both ways. So I think that mutual respect is pretty important.
Every farmer's produce becomes an honoured part of a mosaic of ingredients used at Grain of the Silos restaurant and throughout the associated hotel offerings. Walter Sells from Seven Springs Farm doesn't only grow vegetables, he was also an important gateway to other farmers in the region.
Walter is one of our, he's 70% of our fresh produce that comes into the hotel. And I say hotel because it's not just about the restaurant. The restaurant is within a hotel, but everything that comes in is fed through all the different outlets. So if you're coming into the cafe, you're eating, Walter's produce. You know, whether you're coming to the restaurant at night for the dinner experience, you're eating the same produce. So the idea was to make sure that everything that came in was that premium quality, was actually offered even throughout conferencing. So the idea was to try and make sure that we created a viable business. It wasn't just, this is the A-grade stuff that's going to the restaurant. And so Walter has a farm 2.5 hours from the hotel, from the restaurant, in Larinia, which is just below Cradle Mountain. So it's extremely cold. But it's nestled in this valley that he just seems to be able to grow like amazing produce that you wouldn't think would be able to grow around there. And so, but he was like, at the markets, he was like the guru. You'd walk in and the best looking store, and all this really interesting stuff, chicories, endives, Catalonia, all these things that I hadn't really seen before. I'd seen the Italian version growing up, but like I was like, this is really cool. Like, this is much more interesting than just broccoli and carrots and potatoes, which is what was really on offer, and in abundance, because this is a huge agricultural, farming background. And here's someone who's growing really cool, interesting stuff. So still, had to really kind of twist his arm. And so once you get someone like that on board, and then a few started to pop up, and then we started getting really kind of really good at engaging and trying to work out, because also logistics is a problem. So they're like, oh, we can't deliver. And I'm like, well, I found a company that is like a courier service in Tassie, and so we can get produce from anywhere. You've just got to go and drop it off at the drop-off. They'll pick it up. They'll charge us $20 a box. No, it's too hard. Oh, God, okay. So they're the conversations that were had in that first 2 years, and so it's really been kind of, the reason I'm so proud of it is because through extreme hard work and grit and patience, we've kind of come on the other side where now they're like, it's in abundance, and the relationships are really strong, and I think people can really taste the difference in the produce. Like, making sure that the chefs do the right thing is also a big part of it. But for me, the huge push is to engaging those relationships, meeting. I actually get excited about more going and visit them and what we can do and what we can plan and what they want to grow and all these kind of things. And then the chefs kind of get to do the creating. But I like nurturing that relationship. I think, I don't know, I like hanging out with the farmers.
Chefs are used to coming up with dishes and ticking ingredients off a list for next day delivery. But that's not how ordering works when you're interlinked with farmers.
So the idea with the spreadsheet came around. He's like, I want to grow for you now. I'm like, oh, okay. So before, I guess, was a real kind of reacting to what's available. So he would say, for the next 3 months, I've got kohlrabi, I've got celeriac, I've got heaps of Jerusalem artichokes, and tell me what you need. Or we'd work week to week. He just sends a list. He still does it now. He sends a list, and these are the availability. So he said, I've got an idea where maybe we can have a more sustainable approach where I'll tell you what I can grow, 52 weeks, what's available, 52 weeks of the year, everything. And you kind of give me some estimations of what you might take. And I sat down and I was with my colleagues, and I was like, I was so overwhelmed. Like, I've never had that happen before. Like I said, you're always reacting to a weekly. And he said, basically, if you can kind of tell me, we can plan. And then he also, in that chart, had an idea, an estimation of how long, pending there's no, big surprises with weather, how long I can have that product. So you can actually know that, okay, well, I'm going to be able to actually have celeriac on there over 2 seasons because he can grow it because he's got different climate. And then I don't have to change as much all the time and scramble, because at that time I was still training people to learn. And so that process started 3 years ago. He sat down, his mum was actually visiting from Belgium. She jumped on the conversation at the table because he just picked her up from the airport, and their family, like 5th generation farmers. So it was really interesting to kind of open that can to see what we could do. And then we started doing with a few other farmers. And it, like I said, it's not perfect because it's really difficult to bank on with the current situation that's going on with COVID and things, like what we're going to be doing when. So it's real guesswork. But what it means is that there's ingredients that I really want that he needs 12 months lead time. So the radicchio, the chicory, we want to get puntarella, which is really difficult to get the seeds. So it's not just about the growing; it's about waiting for the seeds to come, into Australia. So those lead times are really important. And so now we have this kind of it's an updated Excel spreadsheet, which actually makes much more sense and much easier to read. And so, last week we've already done our planning for until probably next June. So we kind of just say, this is what we'd like to have. And now we kind of know it's in season. And that kind of just has a much more sustainable approach, because he's not reacting or just planting stuff and then trying to scramble to sell it. He knows he's going to plant spunta potatoes, and I'll take 200 kilos a week. So that's cool. So he'll do 4 rows. So that's kind of where it's leading to. And I think he'll probably be planting less items and more of what we're going to be using. So
we'll be featuring Summerlee Farms' Liz Mankin in an upcoming episode of The Producers in Launceston. Massimo explains why he loves their beef and the persistence necessary to secure it for the restaurant.
And you can't even get Liz's produce. That's how, that's another thing. Like, I tried their beef at the markets 3 years ago. Beef's always a really difficult one in Tasmania. I know people think that would be an easy one, but it's super difficult. To get beef that, to have traceability on our beef is just absurd. It's so hard. But anyway, I've kind of seen them pop up on social media, and I saw them in the markets, and I tried their beef and it was delicious. And I was like, how can I get your beef? Oh, all our boxes are gone. So it's kind of like what I was talking about last night. It's like that hounding. Like, I'm so annoying, because when I want something, I won't give up. And so I kept going. And, because the thing is, their beef is on farm. It's, I think, they don't have a mobile abattoir, but they're not far from their farm. It's completely produced the right way, and it just tastes so good. And the fact that their boxes sell out, like there's a waiting list for their box. And so a year ago what happened was they just called me and said, we've had a cancellation. I'm like, okay, we've got half a cow. I'm like, oh, we'll take it. And so that's but that took a long time. Kim at Forkett Farm, like, they're the same. They're just, sometimes they don't know what they're sitting on. It's like this treasure chest, and it's nice to see them after all this time and the hard work they do put into it. That, I don't like the fact that you can't get access to it sometimes, because it's kind of just but that's part of that supply and demand. But it means that everybody is jumping on board, and also understanding that, there's quality there and they're paying for it, where they're not just looking for cheap meat. They're understanding, and I think the future is also, people talk about how expensive, food is, and there are ways that we can get smart about that with, you get 3 or 4 families together, and you could be eating eye fillet for $15 a kilo. You might have to put the shin in the pasta, but you can go there and buy a whole beast for, I don't know, $1,100, or half a beast for $1,100. They break it down for you, and everyone takes something. It's like you put on the table, it's like, well, I'll take this and I'll take that. Everyone gets some of the eye fillet, and I think that's also a really good way to do it as well, where it's not just about going to the butcher and getting a prime cut of meat. If you put a bit of effort, everyone's got big freezers. You put it in the freezer, it lasts for a few months, and that's a really great way to kind of source, local produce, but affordable as well. Not just, if you go to the butcher and you look at a price for something, oh, that's so expensive. But it's not really if you take everything. And obviously educate people to kind of how to cook the shin. I know they know how to cook the eye fillet, but what do we do with the shin? What do we do with the tongue? I think that'll be, we talk about what's next. And especially in the north of the state, I follow a lot of Facebook pages that farmers are always putting that out there. You can get lamb for $11 a kilo. You take the whole lamb, we've got the shanks, we've got the cutlets, everything you need. Okay, right, split into 2 boxes, you take half, I take half. And, I think that is going to happen eventually. I'm not sure what scale, but I think more and more people will start to think outside the box.
Quality, provenance and traceability are at the heart of meaningful relationships with produce and those who grow it. What is Massimo seeing now? And what role does he believe chefs will play in our food futures? I think
it's not a trend anymore. I think people are really engaging in the local, ever since all the shutdowns happened. I think people had no choice, and we realised that we actually do have an abundance of produce here. I think understanding the cost involved as well, like people, it's not always more expensive to eat well. I think one thing that we've proven in this business is that 95% of the produce that comes in is local, and we're still running a viable business, and I think that's really important. So for me, I guess as an industry leader, I'd like as a hospitality, I'd like other businesses to look at that and think, well, how can they start supporting the local food scene, local food community more, rather than getting produce shipped over in plastic bags. I think the waste and looking after our environment is a big part of moving forward, and I think using what's here is probably the start of that, and more chefs doing it. I think it just takes a bit more commitment and a bit more effort. It's I'm not going to say that working with local produce is it's just this dream. It's not, but if you're really committed to it, I think as chefs we are leaders, and I think with us consumers follow, and we see that with social media. We see that with guests in the restaurant. Whether they go, where's that olive oil from? It's like, oh, well, it's from Village Grove. You go and see Alan at the markets, and then they go and see Alan at the markets, and they get it. And Alan calls me and goes, thanks so much for that tip. No worries. It's just a beautiful thing. And they're getting quality, then they're getting provenance, and they're getting traceability. And I think that's the future. And that doesn't necessarily mean it needs to break the bank, but I think it's a starting point. Yeah.
The Launceston region is small enough to nurture meaningful connections, but large enough to support diversity and variety. Massimo outlines his perspective on this special part of Tasmania.
They're very parochial up here, like they're very proud. There's a long history of, like I said, food, agriculture. But I feel like it's a really supportive community. I feel like, hence why I think this has been such a huge success. Everybody knows somebody. It's still that, Launceston's 100,000 people, probably 150,000 with a greater area, and I think the work community is really a big part of that. Whether you're, buying from a local producer, or you've got the young girl who works in the restaurant who's, related to the owner, or the truck driver, or it's everybody knows somebody. And I think the North, I don't like to kind of, it's really hard. You don't do that Melbourne, Sydney thing where they separate, the cities. But I think the North is just, everything's a little bit closer, not just in mileage, but just the community. And you'll see people really come together to put, the northern region on the map. And I think UNESCO is probably a really great kind of segue into that, like being voted the gastronomy, UNESCO gastronomy, city of gastronomy this year, and just kind of how everyone just got so excited and behind that and was really jumping up and down, because I think they've been trying really hard, and from the markets, the food community, to the restaurants, to the producers, and to the consumers. So I think it's a real kind of it's a real collaborative region, and I think that's probably why it's been so successful.
The producers' dinner at Grain of the Silos in August 2022 was a centrepiece of Agricultured. How did it feel to be the chef that's been working towards this, building those possibilities for years? For
me, I think last night I kind of, at the end I choked up. I mean, I was extremely tired, but I think when I see everybody together, sharing the vision as well, it's really hard. Hospitality's had a really tough couple of years, and I think there's always a lot of there's been a lot of negativity around it, and staffing, and for just everything. And I think what I realised last night is that we've got some beautiful people working for us, and really passionate and committed, and we've got all these producers. And I think for me, after 4 years of starting this crazy idea about supporting local, which I still didn't really understand what that meant at the time. It was more, I think, just a marketing thing to start with. I thought, yeah, we'll support local. And then I think as a chef and as a leader, and as someone who's grown up in hospitality, who just lives and breathes it, I think the fact that I can bring a whole room of people together from all different backgrounds, and there's not just foodies out there, there's just guests that, really loyal to the restaurant, the hotel, and things like that. And it was really moving to see that how happy everybody was and having a good time, that noise in the restaurant. And I think it just, for me, it just kind of cements the fact that you just don't stop, and you keep inspiring, you keep doing what you're doing. And I think, there was a friend of mine, a chef in there at dinner last night, Matty, and he was like, he was so blown away by the emotion in the room. It wasn't about coming to see what the chefs were cooking. It was really about kind of bringing everyone together. And I think that's kind of what we like to do. That's what hospitality is. And I think they're connecting to authenticity. We're being honest and true and vulnerable. We don't always get it right. But I think people understand now, I feel like now I've been here long enough that it's funny, when you move back to Tassie, I kind of felt like I had to prove myself again, even though I was a Tasmanian. I just went away for a little while. And I think once people trust what you're about, I think they just jump on and support. And from day one, I always made it very clear that we wanted to help people and create a venue, a precinct, because where people felt safe and felt comfortable and felt as a business supporting the community, not just the restaurant, but staffing, families, development, all these things. And I think people kind of gravitated towards that. And I think last night just kind of really solidified what that meant, and I didn't coerce the producers in saying what they said, and like that kind of took me back a little bit as well. I just thought, well, people are noticing it, like they notice what we're doing, they notice what I'm doing, and I think that in itself just made me feel like, I'm on the right track.
Massimo Mele is a chef and restaurateur, but over a glittering career, he started looking for more than awards and accolades. Authentic, honest and vulnerable, he's part of a groundswell in hospitality, connecting with producers and the seasonal cycles they are bound by, creating connection and meaning, and making it delicious along the way. This is The Producers. I'm Dani Valent. The Producers in Launceston is a special series celebrating the producers and people of Northern Tasmania. These podcasts are a partnership with Agricultured, a food showcase of this beautiful and rich region, sensitive to heritage, forging a tasty future. Listen to all of the Producers in Launceston podcasts on the Deep in the Weeds podcast network.